My name is Matt Peterson, the President and CEO of the LA Clean Tech Incubator, or better known as LACI. We welcome you here to campus, starting with the Ambassador and Governor Schwarzenegger. We thank you very much for both being here. This is an incredible facility for those that you haven't been to the campus. Most people are surprised to learn it's a government-owned building. In fact, it's an LA Department of Water and Power-owned building, our municipal utility here in Los Angeles. And this campus is the manifestation of many people's dreams, many mothers and fathers that led to this incredible facility. And our organization is blessed to be the steward of this resource. Governor Schwarzenegger and I had a good chance in 2011 to do a fireside chat when Governor Brown was first elected, talking about climate change. So it's really fantastic to have you back here. That gathering was a little smaller than the Global Climate Action Summit that many of us attended about a month ago. And we've come a long way, yet we have a long way to go. And that's what really today is about. Just a couple quick people to recognize. Some of our board members for the organization, Ben Vandebunt, Jim McDermott, and Nancy Sutley are here. Thank you for your leadership. And I don't see him, but I know he was planning. Yeah, thank you. We recently launched our transportation electrification partnership with the mayor of Los Angeles, the county. I think Gary Giroux's here. Ron Nichols, the president of Edison, Mary Nichols, the chair of CARB, David Wright, the head of DWP, Metro, and Phil Washington. And we released our Zero Emissions 2028 roadmap, and hope that you'll check it out and see how we can work together as we move to a zero emissions future by the time the world arrives in Los Angeles for the Olympics. Mayor Garcetti sends his regards. He's sorry he couldn't be here. He's going to try to swing by a little later. He's at a funeral at the moment, but sends his regards and thank you to you, Governor and Mr. Ambassador. And really today is an exciting moment, an inflection point before we arrive in Poland for the COP. I had the good fortune to meet some of your colleagues in the region who have been leaders from the island states, and President Tong of Kiribati is somebody that I had the good fortune to help recognize for his leadership and courage, and that's what today's all about, is really that courage. So we're excited to have you here, Governor, and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. And thank you for the wonderful tour. It's really extraordinary of what you have done here. And I am so happy that this whole thing turned out actually to be a bigger event than we thought. First, we thought it would be just a little event that we organized, but I should always know that when you do something, it ends up being big. So thank you very much. You know, you've been a great, great leader. I want to also say thank you very much to Prime Minister Bainimarama for you know, having this be part of COP23. And he has been an extraordinary leader. I've met him in Paris, and we really love his energy that he brings to this whole environmental movement. So thank you very much to the Prime Minister. The Ambassador Solomara, thank you very much for being here today. And I loved when we met in Paris, and you were telling me a little bit about the way you guys have discussions, that you hate policy talks, but you like to share stories, and that's what we're going to do. And this is why you see this kind of environment, Fijian environment here, the Talanoa Dialogue, you call it. So thank you very much for enlightening us about that, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're not going to talk much about policy. We're going to talk a lot about stories. Everyone is going to share a story here, which I'm really looking forward to. I also want to say thank you to Mayor Faulkner from San Diego. He's a great, great leader, and he has some great announcements that he's going to share. But, you know, I have always said, and this is what the R20, our organization, is all about, is about the subnational governments. Because we have recognized very quickly in California, when the federal government fell behind, California stepped up to the plate, and we showed leadership, and we saw firsthand the kind of great work that can be done on a subnational level. And not just the states and provinces, but also on the city level. And so the mayor is known for great leadership in that area. And so we are looking forward for your announcement that you make later on. So thank you very much for being here with us. Akon and your team, thank you very much for being here and being so interested in that and investing in Africa and doing great, great work. Someone that has a talent, then switched over and bridged over to something else, to give something back, exactly something back Takes one to know one. No, it's really, I just love that, and because, you know, you was so, and are so popular and so big in the music, and then all of a sudden to have someone go and just really put all of this energy into giving something back to the world is just extraordinary. So we all admire you a lot, and we really appreciate you being here today, okay? So thank you very much. Then we have Professor Christian Schwarzenegger here. Can you believe another Schwarzenegger? Is there enough room for two Schwarzeneggers is really the question. But Christian is a cousin, and he's the vice president of the University of Zurich, and is doing an extraordinary job over there. We're very proud of him. The whole family is very proud of him, of the great work that he's doing. So thank you very much for being here today. And of course, as I said, that we are going to continue now with the dialogue, and we are sharing stories here. This is what this is all about. And I think that we are, even though our federal government is not really moving in the right direction, but you know, when you see energy like this, and you see independent people going out and trying to do something about it, and cities and states and everyone working together, I think that we're gonna go and do a really extraordinary job here in America. And I always tell people when I give speeches overseas, I say, don't worry about Trump and about his lack of knowledge and interest in this subject. I say the key thing you should know is the rest of the country of the United States thinks differently. And we are marching in the right direction. And we're seeing progress all the time because everyone is chipping in and everyone is working together, the private sector, the public sector, and there's great energy there. And I think that the key thing for us is that we really communicate this subject the right way. Because I think that environmentalists, and Terry, you're one of those environmentalists that thinks differently in this way, but Terry has been my kind of a man that kind of taught me a lot of things about the environment and about clean energy and all this stuff. And we both have talked about it so many times that when people talk about global climate change, that it doesn't mean much to people. We got to talk to them so they understand what we are talking about. And so also it doesn't really excite people when we talk about the dangers that it creates, that pollution creates 20 years from now. You know, no one is worried about 20 years from now. People want to put food on the table today, and they want to survive today. And this is why it is important to talk more about what is going on today when we have pollution. And today, 7 million people die every year because of pollution. That's what we should be talking about. Because I remember that way back when I was governor, we could not convince the Californian people when we talked about global climate change to move in our direction. And the only way that we started convincing them and the poll numbers changed was when we started talking about the health aspect of pollution. And when we talked about the kids getting asthma early on, and the Heart Lung Association had those commercials on television, and I remember that the oil companies and the coal companies tried to take us out with our AB 32 and terminate all of the great progress that we have made. And we fought back, but it was with that health message that we fought back. The global climate change message did not work. We were always at 33, 35, 38% in the polls, and then all of a sudden it jumped to 61 or 64% or whatever it was in the polls when we did the health message. And this is why I'm trying to tell the rest of the world, you can talk about climate change. And you can talk about what is going to happen in the future if we continue being stupid and rely so much on fossil fuels. You can talk about that, but don't forget to talk about the health aspect, and don't forget about talking about that 19,000 people die every year because of pollution. We got to talk about that because that really registers with people. And with that, I want to just say again, thank you all for coming here today, and I'm handing it over to our moderator, host here today. Thank you very much, Barbara. Right?
Thank you so much. My name is Barbara Buchner. I am Executive Director at Climate Policy Initiative, a research think tank, and I'm also head of the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance. And it's a true pleasure being here with you today. I am here today to be the facilitator, to facilitate this Talanoa Dialogue and to make sure that we're building upon earlier Talanoa Dialogues that have been convened by the Fiji COP Presidency, and that we really learn from some of the previous stories and bring in all the elements together in order to find out how we can accelerate climate action. We're going to get started first with some welcoming and some messages from our dear friends from Fiji. I'm very delighted about that one, and I think particularly after having heard from such a leading voice like Arnold Schwarzenegger, the former governor, and a fellow Austrian, which makes me very happy, of course. I'm going to hand over to Ambassador Mara, and it's a true pleasure having you here. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara, and Mbula Vinaka, everyone. And welcome to this Talanoa, and I thank Mr. Schwarzenegger for convening this Talanoa session here. But before I give a little background on the Pacific Island concept of Talanoa, please let me first introduce a short welcome video from the Fijian Prime Minister, who's also the President of COP23, Mr. Frank Bainimarama.
Bula Arnold, Bula Vinak, Bula everyone, greetings from Fiji, the hub of the Pacific and one of the most climate vulnerable regions on earth. Arnold, I want to thank you for convening this Talanoa Dialogue on climate finance and all of you taking part. I would dearly love to be there, but I'm fighting an election campaign in Fiji and we are hosting some stars this week, almost as big as you, Arnold. Their Royal Highnesses Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. But as Fijian Prime Minister and COP23 President, I want to say how much I appreciate you all embracing the Pacific concept of Talanoa and bringing into the urgent task of raising more finance for the climate vulnerable. We're looking forward to hearing your stories and taking your messages with us to COP24. As I continuously say, climate change is too big an issue to leave to national governments alone. We need the energy, the commitment, and the innovation of subnational players, the grand coalition that has always been the centerpiece of my COP presidency. Because this is the only way we are going to effectively tackle this crisis. The scientists have just told us that the goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is still possible, but it is quickly moving out of reach. And we need to move a lot faster. And we need your help to do it. I want to pay tribute to Arnold Schwarzenegger for his own bold leadership of the climate struggle. As he once said about me, we are kicking some serious butt. And together with all of you, I know we can terminate the current complacency and lack of resolve and do what is necessary to protect the vulnerable and save our planet. As we say in Fiji, thank you to all of you, and hasta la vista, baby. See you later.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think the Prime Minister has clearly laid out the importance of today's Talanoa as part of the global fight to terminate the root causes of climate change. And it remains for me to add a few words to explain the concept and why we believe the Talanoa approach is so important to this whole process. First, though, I wish to reiterate my Prime Minister's message in thanking Mr. Arnold Schwarzenegger for all the support he has shown to Fiji's presidency of the COP23 and for the important role he is playing in mobilizing subnational climate action. This kind of leadership is absolutely critical if we are to have any chance of turning the tide against global warming. And as the Prime Minister just said, Arnold, for those who are unfamiliar with the term Talanoa, it is a Pacific Island process of sharing stories. But it is a storytelling for a purpose. The ultimate goal of the COP23 presidency this year is to use this Talanoa Dialogue process to give political leaders the encouragement, the inspiration, and ideas they need in order to revise their nationally determined contributions upwards. One of the things that is special about the Talanoa is that it gives us an opportunity to hear stories and perspectives that we wouldn't hear otherwise, to tell our stories and to listen to the stories of others, and in the process, be inspired by perspectives and insights we may not have considered before. As a Pacific Islander, there are few development topics more important than climate finance. For us, the need for innovative financing solutions is a matter of survival. Our ability to attract the finance we need in order to adapt to the impacts of climate change will in large part determine what sort of future our children and grandchildren will have. So friends, I look forward to hearing stories from such a distinguished group, which represents voices from across the financial world. As the Prime Minister just said, the resources and wisdom gathered in this room sends a huge boost of confidence that we haven't lost the fight yet. We can still achieve the vision of the Paris Agreement if we decide to work together and help countries urgently raise their game. Your participation today will also help us ensure that the critical role of subnational actors, states and regions in particular, is included in the official guidance we will present to political leaders at COP24. In fact, this will be the last official Talanoa Dialogue event before the so-called preparatory phase comes to an end at the end of the month, next Monday to be precise. After that, the Fijian presidency will work with our Polish colleagues to distill the great wealth of information we have gathered so far into key messages that will inform the political discussions in Poland. So friends, I and my team are here to listen. We are eager to hear your stories and to carry your messages into the UN climate negotiations. To help with this and to focus our discussions after the storytelling portion, I would ask you to keep the following two questions in your minds. One, what are the best opportunities for climate-smart investments at the city and sub-national level that can scale and be replicated globally in transport, built environment, and energy? How can best, and number two, how can best-in-class examples or best practices developed in the North be shared with the South and vice versa? With that, ladies and gentlemen, I now have the great honor to recognize and thank our partners again in this Talanoa, the Schwarzenegger Institute, Regions 20, and Climate Policy Initiative. And of course, thanks also to LA Clean Tech Incubator for being such a wonderful host. And with those words, I turn the floor back to Barbara.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador, and thanks so much to you and to Fiji for all the leadership that you've shown. I've been involved with efforts to shift investments towards a more sustainable economy since a very long time. And unfortunately, sustainable investment has far too often been considered as a niche issue. All you around this circle here actually are showing that you are very much trying to change this fact and really trying to make it a mainstream issue. And indeed, over the last few years, what we have seen is that more and more actors at many different levels and from different constituencies have really tried to step up and get involved. And there's growing recognition of the increasing and critical importance of shifting investments from a brown to a green economy worldwide. The goal of today's Talanoa Dialogue is really to learn from each other. No one has all the answers. What we're looking for is for fresh ideas that can inspire ambition, that can inspire climate action, and that ultimately can inspire really a higher scale of investments. And so what we are trying to learn here is how can we finance a road towards resilience? How can we finance a road towards net zero economies? How can we get there? So as the ambassador just said, we will be guided by two overarching questions. One, really trying to understand what are the concrete opportunities. And I think that links back to Arnold's opening story on we have to change the narrative. We have to show that there is real opportunities for investment here. It's not a burden, it's an opportunity. And the second one on really how can we share knowledge and replicate. So how can best-in-class examples that are being developed in the north be shared with the south and vice versa. So we're going to jump right into our storytelling segment now. After some initial stories from around the circle here, I'm going to involve others from the circle here. Again, we do want to embrace the Talanoa spirit here. It's an inclusive process, so we want to make sure that we hear all the voices here around the circle. But for that reason, I'm also going to ask you to be respectful and to stick to the 3 minutes for your opening stories. And I'm going to use my Austrian part again and making sure that you are sticking to your 3 minutes. And so with that, I'm going to actually start asking Akon, and again, it's a true pleasure having you here, and after all the leadership you've shown, to start with our first story.
Sorry, guys, I spilled coffee all over my microphone, so they took it. All morning I was looking for the creamer. I finally found it. I was so excited, I just spilled it all over my shoes. Thank you guys for having me. This is amazing. This is actually my first official forum in the United States relating to anything related to energy, climate change, or even government related. You attracted it. You know, I've been a huge fan. The things that you're doing from entertainment and politics are just amazing. You know, you really set the bar for what could be done and what could be possible. As I know, I'm not quite sure what your citizenship is, but I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. My dad and my mom made sure that we were all born in the U.S. so we wouldn't have immigration issues in the future. My dad was a very forward thinker. You know, he saw the challenges he took to get to America, so he felt that he wanted to make sure that we were all born in America so we wouldn't have those same challenges. Shortly around 12 years old, we all came to the States after being raised in Senegal and went to school. So I was going to school in Africa and then speaking about 3 or 4 different languages. Then I came to America to learn English and speak English. So I realized there was a huge cultural difference. You know, I was really dark, nappy hair, couldn't get no girls. All the light-skinned, curly-haired guys took all the girls. So I was really frustrated. I got, you know, very angry. I had this really anger type of thing going on, and for some reason I always got into fights, always fighting. But when I started fighting, I attracted a whole different type of crowd, which is the crowd that they say you shouldn't want to be around. You gotta be very careful who you're attracted to. So I started hanging around a lot of gangsters and drug dealers and troublemakers, and I became a car thief. I used to steal cars. So I was in Jersey City, New Jersey, with the biggest car theft operation in America, and someone told me that the Olympics was happening in Atlanta. So I moved to Atlanta to sell cars. And surprisingly enough, it became a huge thing. I started selling it to all the entertainers, sports guys, athletes, comedians, you name it, superstars. And ultimately, I always had music in my passion because that was something that I always did through my dad. He was a jazz musician. So all the money that I made from the street selling cars, I would invest it back in the music studios because I had to justify where my money was coming from. And at the time, music was a cash business in studios. So I had about 3 or 4 different investments in studios where I funneled all my street money. And then I get locked up. When I got locked up, I was in this cell with this older guy who was actually on his way to be shipped for death row. And he just looked at me, he said, if you invested all the time into your talent that you did into the music, you could be huge. And I thought about that. No risk. I could do what I love to do. And I can actually be successful if I put all my energy into it. And that's what I ended up doing. I started Convict Music, which became what I'm known for today. And then within it, there will always be jail bars at the top of every song that I ever did. As soon as the song starts, you hear that convict. That actually was a reminder of where I never wanted to go back to and what changed my life for the better. So all the way down from 50 Cent to Michael Jackson, you would hear those convict bars at the top of the record. I even convinced Gwen Stefani to be in jail in solid gold bars in her video. But it was a subliminal message. And I realized that influence went a long way because I always wanted to go back home to Africa and do something great because I would go visit my grandma. And then while I was visiting my grandma, there would be no electricity and no clean running water. And I always vowed to myself that I would actually come back and do something with that. So that success led me into creating Akon Lighting Africa. And then with Akon Lighting Africa, the goal was to electrify at least 1 million homes within 1 year. Now, it was a very ambitious plan. No one thought that we could actually pull it off. But the need for electricity was so vast that we ended up being in 21 countries in 3 years, impacting way beyond 1 million people, but over 600 million people throughout Africa. And it just been something that just realized that the impossible can actually be done if you just put your mind to it and set yourself to a great position. And it led me now to here having conversations about climate control.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks so much, Akon, very inspiring. I'm going to ask the audience actually not to applaud after each story, because I do really want to make sure we focus here, and then at the very end, we'll gather all your report. But I do want to kind of immediately jump to Mayor Falconer, who has some very exciting stories to share with us today, and clearly has been a big leader in San Diego.
Well, good morning, and thank you for hosting us here. And Governor, thank you for your kind introduction. San Diego is a story of innovation, and particularly when we're talking about climate change, renewable energy, and bringing people together. So today I will be talking about our climate action plan, but most importantly, and this is the first time in a public setting, we have a press conference in San Diego later this afternoon, though, that I'm very proud to announce that San Diego will be the largest city in the United States to move towards community choice aggregation with a goal of 100% renewable energy by 2035.
Okay, that deserves an applause.
You clap. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
There's exceptions.
And
There's
it's
exceptions.
to really taking place of the clean energy revolution that Governor Schwarzenegger started here in California. And to your point, it is cities. It is cities that can help lead the way. That's where jobs are created. That's where our families are. That's where our kids are. And then in San Diego, just like throughout Southern California and everywhere, clean air, clean water, that's part of our DNA. That's part of who we are. And so to take a leadership position, but to do it thoughtfully and deliberately. And the plan that I'm going to introduce later today is one that was vetted for a long time. They've had a business model, and we're actually going to save dollars, by the way, doing it. And that's the type of thing that I think is, the governor says, not only about health, but about finances. This is not a partisan issue, ladies and gentlemen. It's a right thing to do issue. And that's one of the things that we're so proud of in San Diego. You're going to see that later today, where we have business leaders standing, we have environmental leaders. That's our opportunity. That's how we show what is possible. That's how we're going to create those clean jobs, the clean tech jobs to be here of the future. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but that's why this is so important, and that's why I'm honored to be here today with you all as we help set that tone in San Diego. We're proud of everything we're doing and even working with our utility, I might say. And that's a big part of what we're doing in terms of making that infrastructure, SDG&E, available for electrification of our transportation. That's how we're going to get our GHGs down to 50%, what we're doing. So a lot in San Diego. That's my 3 minutes. That's my story. I'm glad to be here. More to come, and thank you all for your help and support. I appreciate it.
Let me actually hand back to Arnold, because you did mention on where the clean tech jobs were created. There's, obviously, Arnold, you've been at the very origin of why we have now all this movement here in California. So over to you.
Yeah, Mayor, first of all, let me just say thank you very much. Because, you're a Republican. And it proves that you cannot put everyone in the same pot. Because there are Republicans out there that are smart, and that going in the right direction, and they don't see issues as a divided issue or as a partisan issue or anything like that. They see it as a people's issue. And it is wonderful and refreshing to hear that. And what's good about something like San Diego is when they go in this direction is not just for San Diego. When the mayor is going to the National Mayor's Conference, now I know I've been there to the Governor's Conference, the National Governor's Conference, it gets very competitive. And everyone is stealing ideas from everybody, and everyone gets inspired when someone is trying to outdo someone else. So when he presents this at the mayor's conference, I guarantee you all the other mayors are going to say, well, hell, if he can do it, then I can do it too. Because it gets very competitive. And therefore you are becoming a great inspiration, and not just a leader in San Diego, but statewide, nationwide, and worldwide. So thank you very much for the great work. Yes, absolutely. And I just want to say, Barbara, when people applaud, I think they should applaud. If you don't mind. No, because Akon, if I heard your story, I mean, it's an inspirational story. How someone turned around his life from taking from people to giving back to people. And that's a great message that every young person, any person should hear. And this is why I think people got rallied up and enthusiastic about it and applauded. So I applaud you for this great story and for the great life that you have led so far, and now giving back to Africa and trying to create all this energy down in Africa. So thank you very much. And just before I tell my story, I just want to say thank you very much to Susan Kennedy for being here today. Susan has been my chief of staff for the last term of my governorship, and without her we wouldn't have gotten all this environmental work done. She was very, very instrumental and a great, great partner. A Democrat, because I had many Democrats in my administration, because I was smart enough to know that no party has all the answers. So I thought I should have 100% of the brain power rather than just 50% of the brain power. So this is why I had also Democrats working for me. So thank you much, Susan, for being here. You, of course, started the company right after Advanced Microgrid Solutions. People should know I'm one of the investors in your company, and because I have great hopes of solving some of the great solutions. So thank you very much for being here today. Big hand for Susan Kennedy. And then I have to mention Senator Fran Barfley, who is here today with us, sitting right over here, because it was this woman. I mean, she is powerful. Powerful in ideas and guts. I mean, she wrote AB 32. And I'm always saying to people, you can call me anything that you want. You can call me Schnitzel. You can call me Schwarzi, Terminator, whatever you want to call me, but don't call me self-made man, because I did not do any of this myself. I get a lot of the credit with the environmental work that we have done here in California, but she wrote the law, and she fought it, and Terry Tamminen also, yeah, but I mentioned his name already earlier, okay, so let's not split the, I'm focusing on you now, Fran. You have been an absolute jewel. I loved working with you when I was up there in Sacramento, and you, of course, have had a tremendous history of writing a lot of environmental laws up there and being the brain power behind all of this stuff. So let's give a big hand to Senator Fran Barfley. And then, as I said, that I don't do any of this stuff by myself. I want to point out Christoph Natal is here, who is the head of our R20 organization, worldwide organization. Thank you very much, Christoph, for coming over all the way from Switzerland over here and being part of this and doing such a great job with the R20. Big hand also to him. Now, the story I want to share is just when we talk about financing green technology and all this, which is very important. I mean, my mother-in-law, she started Special Olympics, and I became eventually, when I met Maria, the national coach and international coach, and started the weight training competitions in Special Olympics and all that. But Yun has always said, you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you don't have the money, you have nothing. And this is why this financing and this meeting here, this gathering is very important, because not enough people know how to go about it. And this is why we started our digital legislative handbook. It's an environmental handbook where we share stories and policies from California, so the rest of the world can see those policies and don't have to reinvent the wheel. And we will continue on with the digital handbook to show people how they can get the financing, where all the brilliant companies are that can solve some of the problems, environmental problems and all that stuff, because we need to share that. And I think that here, this is good that we are sharing stories here. Mr. Ambassador, we like the idea of sharing stories. So thank you for inspiring us in that. But anyway, the story I wanted to share is the Tesla story, because people don't know that Tesla was looking in America for a facility. And which state is offering them the best deal, and where is their facility big enough where they can manufacture and so on. It was in 2010, the last year of my governorship. And I and Susan, we started talking about, is there any facility around? And I remember Susan and Terry came to me and says, well, the NUMMI plant is available because Toyota is moving to Atlanta, I think they moved, if I'm not mistaken. And so this plant is available. So not only would they have lost 4,500 jobs by moving to Atlanta with their plant, but we would have had this whole plant empty. So we figured out a way of bringing Tesla into that plant. Now, not only did Tesla absorb this 4,500 workers, but they actually created 10,000 jobs there at the NUMMI plant. And they now are building, of course, their cars. As you know, Tesla has been the most successful luxury kind of a car in the world, with the biggest orders and pre-orders and everything like that. So we are very happy that we became the state that facilitated through tax incentives and all kinds of, we looked at every department for money to give them, to help them, so that we attract them to California and to have them use this plant. So they bought that plant, and they have been the most successful car company. We just, I think the day the earnings came out and the profits and all this, very, very impressive. So this is my story of how we as a state, how the government and the private sector, the public and the private sector has worked together to create jobs and to do something really great for the future of this world. So thank you very much for listening to that story.
I'm embracing the clapping as well. I do think you're obviously very right. Let's embrace the clapping, because you're right. It is about inspiring. And if we don't have time to include everyone here, this is a process, so we will not stop today. So I think it's something that we will continue to hear the stories. But I want to build a little bit of where you've left off. I think California has very ambitious goals. You started it. What is left to do in order to get actually to achieving these goals? So David, you're here today. I'd love to hear more from you about that. It should be on.
Is this on? Yeah? Okay. Good morning. David Hochschild with the California Energy Commission. I really want to thank the Fijian people for this tradition. This is precisely the type of honest exchange and listening that our society needs more of. And I just really want to thank you for bringing that to us and to all the organizers today. So in the mid-1990s, I was lost in my life. I had a lot of friends who seemed to know exactly what they were doing in their life. And I was ignorant but well-meaning. I took a trip to South Africa, and I fell in love with the country, and I moved there to teach. This is right after Mandela had taken over as president. But really what I did that year is learn. And apartheid, as you remember, actually was something nobody thought would end. South Africa was the most powerful military and economy on the continent. They were an exporter of weapons. They had nuclear weapons. And it was only through this incredible global divestment movement and activism around the world, and the role that music played as well, that made that change possible. And in the township where I was living in the Eastern Cape, one of the first things that Mandela did was install rooftop solar post offices. There hadn't been mail service in the townships. And something about that just caught my eye, that this is something that can help with democratization. It's clean, the solar doesn't make any noise, it doesn't move. And I just got excited about the vision of taking solar panels, which at that point were the most expensive, rarest form of electricity generation in the world, and making that, devoting my life to making that the most common and the biggest form of energy generation in the world. Went back to California and started a group called Vote Solar to do advocacy at the state level, now working in 25 different states. And Governor Schwarzenegger came into office with Terry Tamminen and others and proposed this Million Solar Roofs program. And a number of us worked really hard to get that over the finish line. And today in California, I'm happy to share with you that in January, we're going to reach 1 million solar roofs. In addition to that, because California got to scale, and this is what we are as a state, we're a giant incubator. We get things to scale. It brought the cost down globally. So the largest source of new electric generation added to the grid, both in the United States and globally last year, was solar. And in May, at my commission, we voted to mandate solar on all new homes starting next year in California. Incredible momentum. And to me, this is the model. We've got to focus, I think, on challenges. I think the next big one is, frankly, electric vehicles. We have to do for electric vehicles what you did for solar. And the thing is, when we get this right, the benefits go far beyond our borders. And all the criticisms, you think, all the negative critiques we've heard from the Koch brothers and others about how it's going to crash our economy, the lights are going to go out, unemployment's going to go up. Well, what's happened? As we've done all this, California's economy has grown by 46% since 2000. The rest of the country, 35%. We're outperforming. Unemployment has gone down to some of its lowest levels. We haven't had any rolling statewide blackouts since the energy crisis, and that had nothing to do with solar. That was market manipulation from companies like Enron. So half what we need to do is just tell this success story loudly and clearly and around the world and focus on the next challenge, and I think that's electric vehicles. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And I'd like, before going to Terry, I'd like to go to Ken, actually, and just hear a little bit more, again, on the California success story. And again, actually, one of the reasons why I moved here a couple of years ago was because all of this leadership here. And love to hear a little bit more from you, Ken, on actually really the investment side. And again, I do think California has a lot to offer, to learn from on how to actually invest and incentivize investments.
Well, thank you. Good morning. I'm Ken Alex. I'm a senior policy advisor to Governor Brown, who sends his greetings. And as the governors have often shared with each other, Governor Brown always says that his policies have built on Governor Schwarzenegger's policies. So thank you, and to Senator Pavley as well. I want to just talk very briefly about the massive investment California is making through the cap and trade program, another effort started by Governor Schwarzenegger and Senator Pavley. We now raise literally billions of dollars each year, all of which is invested in climate solutions. And that is required also by law that 35% of that investment be done in disadvantaged communities. And so very briefly, I just want to talk about one program which hasn't gotten a lot of attention that I think is quite innovative and has a lot of potential outside of California. We worked with the mayor of Fresno, another Republican, Ashley Swearingen, to create a program called Transformative Climate Communities. So instead of doing $1 million here and $1 million there, the idea was to take a very significant amount of money. It turned out to be $70 million in Fresno, $35 million in an area of Watts here in Los Angeles, actually right near where my dad worked as an optometrist for 30 years. And also an area in the Inland Empire. So the idea was, instead of working on one thing, that we would have a significant amount of money, and we would work with a local community, and that community would invest that money and some additional funds in a whole suite of issues around housing and transportation and green infrastructure and workforce development, all of which would be aimed at reducing greenhouse gases. And so all three locations have been extremely innovative, and now local communities are working better with local governments, and there have been inspired in the local community to think about new and interesting ways to address climate change. And so this has been a very focused investment. We're about to do round 2. We're going to select 2 more locations this year. And I think this sort of a larger sum of investment has really helped get attention of the community, of the local government, and I think is allowing greater change.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that comes back a little bit on how you can really bring it down to everyone. How can you communicate to everyone, every person on the street, why it is important? So I think it's a very big kind of effort of how you actually bring some of the money that is being captured on the federal level to the local community. Jerry, you're the man we've heard already, so we want to hear more about your efforts and your story.
Well, success has many parents and failure is an orphan, so trust me, as Arnold said, it is thanks to many, many people in this room and outside of it. 22 years ago, a few miles from where we're sitting, a baby Pacific gray whale washed up on a beach. And over 36 hours, hundreds of volunteers worked to rescue that baby gray whale, get her down to SeaWorld, 120 miles south of here, where they nursed her back to health over a period of a year, released her back into the wild, and we have evidence that she survived and went on to thrive. They called her JJ. Now, JJ would normally have a 75-year lifespan. Their biology is very similar to humans. Why am I telling you this story at a finance panel? Well, that rescue of that baby whale taught me 2 things. First of all, those hundreds of volunteers were young and old, black and white, Republicans and Democrats. They came from every walk of life, rich and poor, you name it. They checked their egos at the door because there was a creature in need. And that, to me, exemplifies what Arnold is saying, is that if we can get the message across, if we can show people something that motivates them, that they will do that. They will come to the aid, in this case, of our endangered planet. But the other thing that that story taught me was that she will probably die of starvation by the age of 50, much as we're all saying, oh, we rescued that baby gray whale, and gray whales are no longer endangered. The truth is, because of climate change, we're acidifying our oceans. We're making them more acidic, the only species ever on this planet to be powerful enough and stupid enough to change the chemistry of the ocean, and that is wiping out her food source in the Arctic and making it harder for those creatures that she eats to form. And so in 50 years, she and her species will probably be endangered once again, less than 50 years. So that motivated me, and along with other things, to go into public service, to be a Democrat who joined a Republican and said, we've got to solve this. And finance, it seems to me, over my years in public service and with the R20 and now with the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, finance has always been the missing piece. We've had technology, we've had policy that can help enable and drive the technology, but the finance has been the piece that has been the slowest to come to the table. So very quickly, 2 examples that show that we can do this again by cooperating. In Fiji, the DiCaprio Foundation, working with the Fijian government, put together a small trust fund that allows remote villages, rural villages in Fiji on remote islands, to replace their diesel generators for their small microgrids with solar battery-powered systems. And then, because they're paying a lot for diesel, instead they pay to repay the solar battery-powered system generator, and when it's paid off, they have free energy after that, and then that money can be loaned to the next village and the next one. So that money will finance projects in perpetuity. The second one, even larger, that we worked on with the R20 was when the city of Rio de Janeiro and other cities came and said, hey, we want to replace our streetlights with LEDs that will save 70% of the energy and therefore reduce emissions by that amount from the power, but we can't afford it. We don't have the money to do it all at once. And so we put together a special purpose finance vehicle, $500 million, to help 13 cities replace their streetlights with LEDs. And then again, when that money gets repaid, it can be loaned to the next city and the next city. There's 5,600 cities in Brazil that can now have access to that fund. So it shows that there are ways, by working with subnational governments, with national governments, with technology providers, if we're properly motivated, if we understand what's at stake. And that, in fact, we can do this, especially in mechanisms that are not just one-time finance, but will be a gift that keeps on giving. Now, those of you that know me know that I also care about a guy named William Shakespeare. Shakespeare said that nature's bequest gives nothing, but doth lend. And so when nature calls thee to be gone, what acceptable legacy canst thou leave? Thanks to the Fijian government and this Talanoa Dialogue, I think all of us are telling our stories of a legacy that even William Shakespeare would be writing great plays and poetry about. Thank you.
Can I get a mic here? Sorry. Great. Thank you so much, Terry, and clearly extremely important on really how you can finance the missing pieces of infrastructure across different sectors. And I think what you've been doing and what the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation has been doing is incredible, and R20 as well. And that brings me actually to Patrick here from Blue Orchard. Why is a private equity fund actually interested in coming into this game? I mean, this is exactly what we need to attract. We need to attract mainstream investors. So Patrick, your story, please.
So how many of you have investments in something that you would call green? How many of you have investments which you call green and are in a developing country? Far less hands go up. Huh? And this is basically what Blue Orchard has been doing for nearly 20 years. We have invested more than 2,000 investments in more than 85 developing countries over the last 20 years. And we have really proven that you can make profitable investments in these countries and earn money as an investor by doing good and at the same time achieving financial goals. But this is not the story, although it might be an interesting one. But 2 years ago, I was introduced to a brilliant guy, and he showed me a list of 600 projects, renewable energy, energy efficiency, waste management at the sub-national level. And when I saw that list, I find it pretty impressive, almost incredible. And as an investor, we're always a bit kind of hesitant and critical when we saw things that looked too good. So I asked him, can I get more information on these projects? And then he said, yeah, sure. It's all on our website. So, wow, okay. So I asked my team, my analysts, to look into these projects, and really everything was there on the website, data set with expected returns, expected capital investment, and so on. So Governor Schwarzenegger was certainly a visionary when he initiated R20, which did all this great work with Christoph Nuttall and together with Terry Tamminen, who reached out, worked with subnational governments, subnational authorities to bring all these projects on that list. What we have done over the last 2 years, Christoph and I, and in the meantime we have become close friends as well, since we've been working together day and night and over the weekends and traveled all over Europe and the world. We have put together an investment fund. It's the so-called Subnational Climate Fund for Africa. It's a 350 million investment fund backed by the leading global development banks, which will go live early next year and starts investing in these projects. This fund will not only invest 350 million, it will also unlock billions of co-investment capital. It's scalable, it's replicable, and we will replicate it for all other developing countries in these worlds. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks so much for that. I think that is really an amazing, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Christoph a little later also on how we can replicate that and what's the lessons from R20. But I think this is exactly what we need. We need to make sure that we can use the public money that is out there most effectively to unlock private capital and do that in emerging economies. But I know, Christian, we've heard from the Schwarzenegger clone already a little bit before. I think I'd be very curious to hear from you a little bit more the science perspective. Again, you are leading really important research in Zurich, University of Zurich. What is your perspective? What's missing there, and how can we add to the story?
So thank you very much for this occasion. Actually, not only California, also Switzerland, and I can include Austria too, are innovators in this field, are investing a lot in alternatives. And when it comes to science, I want to start my story by telling you I have recently boarded an airship. It's like a flying cigar. It's very interesting. It's the best way to fly, you know. It's like being on a cloud. And I was part of an experiment to observe the water surface. It's a high-resolution camera that is used. It costs 1.5 million to do this, or to produce this camera. And it can detect plastic particles on the water surface. Now this will gonna be used on a satellite to monitor the waste, plastic waste in the oceans. And it gives us precise information on one kind of square meter where this waste is moving, where we can detect it, where we can do something against it. Something that picks up your argument. So I thought, wow, it was not only a super feeling to be in this flying cigar, it was also fantastic to be part of this experiment. Let me tell you something else in medicine. We are doing research in Alzheimer at the University of Zurich. We have a team, and I'm very proud that Christoph Hock is among us. They are working with an antibody therapy to clean the brain from the plaques that destroy our brain. And we are now currently working together with another team to combine this technology with stem cells. So again, if I talk to Christoph and his team, I'm really astonished what we can achieve as scientists, you know, what can be done. So wow, I thought, what can we do in the field of finance? What are our professors of banking and finance doing? We have over 30 people concentrating on this research. And I have to tell you, they do not have kind of climate change on their agenda. Actually, it's still, for the majority, the paradigm of profit seeking, of maximizing profits, and it simply doesn't fit into their equation. And another point I have to make is, these people, they educate the future leaders. Kind of the students that go into kind of banking and finance, these are the people who later on do the decision making in investments. So I think, and that was my strong opinion, that we have to do something about that at the University of Zurich. And we funded a Sustainable Finance Institute. It's probably the largest in the world if you combine it with the law. And we are looking into how we can improve the information basis, because you need knowledge. Investors need knowledge. You need to have standardized instruments to evaluate whether it's really a green economy, whether it's really an impact investment. So we provide the methodology, and we also provide the regulatory framework that is working. We are evaluating whether something is good or bad for this movement. So I think this is a very crucial moment, and I'm very proud that we are able to strike a deal today. We will conclude a cooperation with USC, Arnold Schwarzenegger Institute, and R20 to combine this scientific approach to give best practices on a scientific basis together with practitioners, with people who really do the investment, also with Blue Orchard and others, to really make a difference and go forward, because we have to act now. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. If you can pass it on to Eden. Thank you so much, Christian. Actually, to Eden first, sorry. No.
Oh, it's right. Okay.
Just to say, I do think that's one of, I mean, as you say, I think particularly in research, finance still is the missing piece on some of the research agendas. So I think combining this effort with the practitioners is extremely important, and really coming up with the right information that can make that can mainstream climate considerations in daily decision making, I think is exactly what is needed. But I'd like to come to the practitioners again and hear from you a little bit more about effort champions and really understand what your story is.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara. So my story is my story is inspired by almost everybody in this room, even though you don't know it. My background is in neurosurgery. I am practicing in Ghana and have a practice in South Africa as well. My hospital, Capital Hospital, is actually, I believe, one of the best kept secrets in the world. We're pioneering research in stem cell and using new protocols of combining, if you like, alternative medicine with conventional medicine to provide treatment for cancer, and leading in stem cell research as well. But what brought me into climate change started from my days in medical school in Israel, where I was studying, where I used to go to drive around and see all these solar panels in houses in Israel that were being used for water heating. And I could never understand, whenever I go back to the continent, why we had all the sun in the world and we didn't have solar panels. It just never made sense to me. And I remember anytime I used to ask people, they tell me, oh, no, but there's not enough photovoltaics on the continent. I just never understood what that meant. But something happened a few years ago in Africa when I moved back to practice because my dad suffered a stroke and I wanted to be back there. And I realized that most people couldn't afford the kind of surgeries I did. But increasingly, Africa was catching up on non-communicable diseases, even though we're already burdened with communicable diseases. So lifestyle diseases like heart attacks, cardiovascular disease, etc. And I went to the Minister of Health and said, is there a way in which we can begin to put more money into prevention? And we couldn't talk about prevention without talking about the environment, because like the governor said, when I began to see that our health was a reflection of our environment, we eat from the environment, we drink from the environment, we breathe from the environment. And a lot of the consequences of our health was as a result of our disregard to the natural dictates of nature. I began to take a different approach to how we approach health. And so I launched an initiative called the Regenerative Health and Nutrition Project. I managed to get enough countries to come on board at community levels to begin to develop health programs from preventive levels. And then we got plagued by, if most of you remember, the Ebola epidemic in West Africa in 2014. And I got tired of looking at African leaders going around begging for gloves and etc. And my approach was, as a surgeon, if you have a hemorrhage, you stop the bleed and contain it where the problem is. You don't go begging before it spreads to other parts of the world. So what we did then was to mobilize the African private sector, to come together to raise money to fight this epidemic. And I'm proud to say that in 2014, in November, we managed to get the African leading private sector to come together to raise $30 million. Wow. And then went to the communities by creating a shortcode through a text, text $1 each kind of program, and managed to raise another $30 million. We raised $60 million in less than a month, and then brought together the doctors, volunteer doctors, to go to Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. And within a matter of 6 months, we managed to eradicate Ebola. We felt very proud that this was an African solution to an African problem, that I decided to keep that same network, that movement of private sector multinationals, and all the people who contributed were ordinary people who became an active part of a movement to solve a problem like Ebola, and said if you could take that same problem and try to use it to solve the climate issues, poverty, and all of the things that underpin our lifestyle in Africa as a result of environment. And that was what Afro Champions was born about. We're inspired by what Akon was doing in the area of clean energy, in solar energy. And we saw all these models that we felt were encouraging, that Afro Champions grew as a result of that. So Afro Champions is a body of African multinationals that we brought together, who in the last 15 to 20 years didn't exist, but are creating incredible, amazing companies who through their cross-border operations are revolutionary technologies on the continent. It's chaired by a gentleman called Dangote in Africa. And we now have partnered with the Subnational Climate Fund because we feel that whilst the rest of first of all, great ideas without financing is hallucinations, and Africa keeps going cap in hand begging. But we think that there's a lot of resources we can already mobilize on the continent like we've done with Ebola, which is what we've done by bringing African multinationals and private sector champions to partner the Subnational one. Two, is also to say that whilst the rest of the world is trapped in the idea for development, which is that you've got 10% of the population in the world who have really contributed very quickly to the mess that we find ourselves in, Africa cannot afford to try to copy those wrong models. The rest of the world, I always say, is at 100, trying to cut back to 25. They want to go to renewable. They want to go to prevention. They want to go to organic. Well, Africa is at 5. Africa doesn't need to go to 100 trying to follow that idea for development that has messed up the world in 15 years by destroying 50% of the microbiome that our lives depend on for existence. And I always say that if the most valuable thing we have on this planet is the life that we have, then there's only business we need to focus on now is how to protect everything that our lives depend on for our existence. And we believe that if Africans can just stop and not continue to do what, because whilst everybody's trying to come up with the new technologies, etc., they're just practical things we can begin to do by the way we eat, by the way we look at our environment, by our forestation programs, the things that don't really cost a lot of money, that we don't need to be repeating so that you don't create solutions only for us to create new problems. And because those fundamental changes are very hard, we in Africa are taking the prerogative to be part of that conversation now. And that's why we've partnered with Subnational Climate Fund to take this to local communities on the continent. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much. Actually, let me briefly go. First, I'd like to hear a little bit about Asia also and what's going on there. So yes, Masa, you're here with us. And then we're going to go to actually hear a little bit more about the transport sector. But I'd love to hear your perspective. Again, we've heard about inspiring stories for Africa. What can we learn from Asia as well?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Yasu Yamamoto. My background is a venture capitalist in the Silicon Valley right now. And I used to work at Bank of Tokyo, Mitsubishi Finance, and also the Google. And I'm originally from Japan, where a corporate responsibility, social responsibility investment is booming. Green bond is booming. Also, SoftBank, Masayoshi Son, is investing in the solar power, solar energy. So political environment is very friendly for the climate change solution. And my story is almost 35 years ago, one airplane crashed into the beautiful mountain. That is from the Haneda Airport. And my father, he's an organic chemistry PhD / entrepreneur. Was on the board, and he died in the airplane crash. That is the biggest single airplane crash, and I was 4 years old, and I was struggling to combat the difficulties in the life, and but so many people supported me, so that's why I want to give back to community. So I want to support the fragile people in developing countries such as East Timor, Cambodia, Myanmar, now Burma. And I was working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and what I found out is they want to develop their economy, but they need to they need to increase the carbon emission. So they need to balance this kind of dilemma. So I want to solve this problem, and I thought I need to learn more about finance and technology. I think just finance is not enough for solution. So that's why I now became a venture capitalist. So, with technology business viewpoint, I think there are three main points. One is EV, as the former governor said about Tesla. Also, there's a new car coming from China. It's called Biden. Also, there's Nissan Leaf. The Nissan North America is also handling the new project. And number two is the sharing economy. Let's say Uber or Lime or this kind of sharing economy, it's definitely reducing the carbon emission. So I think this, as the government said, EV is supported by government. Why not sharing economy is not supported by government? Let's say our electric scooter, Lime, is forbidden in San Francisco City. It's just, I think it's almost opposite direction that the government should do. And third part is optimization by software. So Google reduces the energy consumption by 40% just by deep learning or machine learning or AI, just by software. So there's so much opportunity to reduce energy consumption by software. So I think we can apply that kind of solution to our all industry level carbon emission. So let's say we need to, but first of all, we need to detect the data or collect the data. So we need to input the sensor, let's say Internet of Things IoT sensor in the house or in the office, so that if the people is not around the office, not in the house, maybe all the energy consumption is stopped something like this. So, and also the blockchain, this kind of emerging technology can detect which energy is coming from clean or not. That is a very convenient tool to detect the right source of the energy. So my suggestion is, like an EV, I think Internet of Things sensor should be supported by government, or software should be supported by government to reduce energy consumption. I think Japan tried to do that in the near future, because Japan is kind of proud of the Kyoto Protocol. Yeah, Kyoto Protocol is ratified when the COP was done in Kyoto. So I think the Asia Pacific also try to advance its method, but I hope the other industry will catch up as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and certainly again, like science and technology, and how can you think outside of the box. But again, I think let me come to Keiichi now. Again, we've heard a lot about the importance of electric vehicles. The next basically challenge: how can we make sure that we actually, make the transport sector sustainable? Can you share your story?
Sure. My name is Keiichi Kitahara. I'm the Director of Business Development at Nissan. I also work on regulatory compliance. So I have about 10 years of experience in electric vehicles and regulatory compliance. I worked starting 9 years ago when we launched the Nissan Leaf, the first mass market EV, and I saw a couple in the parking lot today, so that's great. We took a couple prototypes and we went all over the country. And what we found out is, it's an exciting new technology. It's electrification is, very important to reducing CO2 globally. But we found that not everybody responds to the same messages. So in California, where I grew up, and I worked in Japan, it's a common sense thing to be environmentally friendly and look at sustainability in a positive way. After moving to Tennessee, it's a little bit different. Different messages resonate with consumers in the South or the Midwest. So you have to talk about the benefits in a different way. Eco-friendly works on the West Coast. In the central and southern parts of the country, maybe you have to talk about energy independence or bringing jobs to the region. And we've been able to look at the different messages and kind of tailor a message that works in most places. I think right now we're at a point where we're in an inflection point in terms of electric vehicles. The ramp up has been steady but slow. I think in the next few years, because of regulation, you're going to see a lot of growth in electric vehicles, and technology is catching up to a point where we will have autonomous drive that is prevalent. We'll have much longer range batteries. We'll have vehicles that hopefully are no compromise, where you can have a great looking vehicle, the range that you need, the features, and at the right value. So that's what we're looking for as a corporation, to help develop this kind of win-win situation for the consumers and for industry. Because for industry, we need scale to really be effective and be sustainable, and to develop the profits that we can reinvest into the technology. So that's what we're really looking for. I think we need some help in terms of certainty in regulatory, in regulation. As you know, there's discussion between the federal government and California in terms of how to handle greenhouse gas targets and corporate average fuel economy. So that would really help to have that certainty in terms of where we need to go, what the targets are, and then then we can plan for the future in a much more consistent way. We've been working in a collaborative way with government, local government, state government, and federal government. I think that's something that has to continue. We have to develop the policies that are going to create the right ecosystem for EVs. as an alliance between Nissan, Renault, and Mitsubishi, we have a venture fund. We have an office set up in Silicon Valley that is helping to invest in smaller startups, and we're working, to look at the tech industry as partners for our development.
Great. Thank you so much. Actually, I'm getting inspired here as well. I think that I would love to hear from Senator Beverly, just because we have just heard from you how important it is to have the right regulation, and how actually do you come up with the right regulation. So we've heard a lot about you already, so it'll be an honor hearing your story.
Thank you very much. I thought I'd share another California story, if I may, about our success not only with the automobile manufacturers, but maybe a more homegrown story right here in the Los Angeles area. It was brought to my attention several years ago, I think, Governor Schwarzenegger, when you said quite frequently, you don't have to choose between a healthy environment and a sound economy. You can have it both ways. Well, yesterday I was at this biofuel company, not too far from here. This company came here because of AB 32 and because of your low carbon fuel standard. You created a market for investment right here in California. But here's where the success story becomes really sort of a win-win. This was an old oil refinery. A lot of criteria air pollutants, not a great neighbor for the community of Paramount as far as health impacts. A grant from the California Energy Commission of $5 million went to this company called Altair, whose owner was coming from the state of Washington to California because of our policies. They repurposed this old oil refinery. It's now a biofuel refinery. They retrained the existing employees who were concerned about losing their jobs to work in a biofuel facilities. And yesterday's announcement was World Energy has now acquired and is part of Altair. They're based in Boston. I was okay with the CEO being there, even though he was cheering for the Red Sox, but anyway. They're based in Boston. He was there, and he said to me, it's because of your policies in California. That's why we're spending several $100 million doubling the capacity of this biofuel company, training even more people. So the private sector has really fit into our policies of being economic engines. But part of the story also is the corporate interest of United Airlines. They established a long-term contract for purchasing lower carbon aviation fuels for the Los Angeles airport that will probably be duplicated in other states. So the low carbon fuel standard has been part of the solution in California, along with cleaner vehicles. Most of our emissions, as you know, in California come from mobile sources. The Schwarzenegger Institute is working with the state of Washington, so they will be passing, hopefully, the next legislative year, a lower carbon fuel standard. And that will mean that British Columbia, Oregon, California, and the state of Washington on a subnational level can work together, hopefully to increase lower carbon fuels, create a little competition in the fuel sector, but also clean up the air as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Very inspiring. Julian, let me come to you now and actually hear a little bit more from what you think the insurance sector and insurance as a tool can help in parallel with these other efforts to trigger investment.
Sure. It's always a good way to get someone, build them up. It's the insurance guy. But I've got two things that might surprise you, little surprises to tell you. Well, the first one is I'm African as well. A little bit pasty-faced, I know, but I'm African. So I understand how Africa works. The second thing is that insurance, now this is a secret, so lean in a little bit. Don't tell anyone. But insurance can be really cool. And it has a huge role to play in climate finance. So what are these two links, Africa and insurance? Well, it starts when I was 16, okay? And we had some family friends around. And the adults, they always ask that daft question, what are you going to do when you leave school? I've no idea, but I wanted to go back to Africa. I wanted to help Africans. So I said, I'm going to go and work for a charity and, help Africans. My mother, she immediately said, don't be so bloody stupid. I thought that was a bit harsh. What do you mean by this? She said, son, unfortunately, you've got nothing to offer. Go and get a skill. Go and learn something. Then you can help people. Don't just be cheap labor. So let's fast forward 10 years or so. I find myself in the insurance industry, largely because I hadn't worked hard enough at school, but there you go. But fortunately, it wasn't just, selling car insurance or household insurance. I was in what was called the London specialty risk insurance market. By the age of 28, I was responsible for the Middle East oil and gas desk, ensuring 25% of the world's oil production, and at the largest broking house in the world. Now, I thought that was pretty cool. I was making lots of money, traveling a lot, but I still had this yearning to do something more than that. Once you've insured the Dubai Petroleum Company for 5 years, do you really want to do it for 6? I didn't. So I now had a skill that could be useful, but how's insurance going to be useful for climate change? Well, what most people forget is the insurance is a huge pool of capital. And the scale of investment we need all the capital we can get, needs to be brought to the table. The other thing about that pool of capital, it takes risks other pools of capital won't want. So we've had the private equity, we've had the venture capital guys. They have a risk appetite. Insurance has a totally different risk appetite. And these risks that exist are really barriers. So if you have these barriers, people won't invest, and it puts them off. But we bring this insurance pool of capital to the table. We take those risks. It makes people able to invest in these climate-compatible opportunities. So we're part of the climate finance capital solutions. The other thing about insurance, it's really good for climate resilience. We have, 30% of donor governments' aid goes on disaster response. Most of those disasters, they're natural catastrophes, right? All of which could be insured. So as Adam said, why aren't we mobilizing the private sector in this area? If you have a 1% increase in the number of people insured, you mean it reduces the number of uninsured losses by 13%, and it means you have 20% less burden going on to the taxpayer. So we need to mobilize the private sector insurance capital. So for the last 12 years, this is what I've been working on, mobilizing private sector insurance, doing innovative insurance transactions. An example here in California, a lot of people were unhappy that carbon offsets could be invalidated. Now that's a good thing because it ensures environmental integrity. So a lot of people were moaning and whining about this. So we created a solution with the help of Gary over there at Climate Action Reserve. We came up with a solution. We took that risk off the table. And in the last 12 months or so, we've done $60 million of deals that wouldn't have otherwise been invested in carbon offsets. So this is how the power of private sector insurance can help in climate change. I did get back to Africa, and actually most of my work is still in Africa. We've been developing the insurance market in Ethiopia, in Kenya. We've been underwriting geothermal projects. We've got one in the Caribbean, which is going to give a Caribbean island geothermal clean baseload power. We're developing warranty solutions for electric vehicle batteries to take away that sort of fear of the batteries not working over a long period. We're working on forestry adaptation. How do we deal with that? How can we finance refugee flows? Climate is going to potentially create a lot of refugee flows. So the lessons from this are insurance can be useful, and always listen to your mother.
Thanks so much, Julian. An inspiring story as well. And I think I'd love to get to Rampa now. I think we've heard, the importance of having different capital providers, private sector, people, public sector actors around the table. Philanthropic capital is critical here. And again, we've heard a little bit around already from the circle here. But what is your story, actually, in terms of?
Oh, thank you. I'm honored to be here in this group. I thought I would share a little bit of my personal story since this is a Pacific dialogue. I actually grew up in Tahiti until the age of 16. My father was an American, but he moved there after World War II. So I grew up in the mountains and out in the ocean on an outrigger canoe. And at the age of 8, we sailed across the ocean, my family and myself, from Tahiti to Hawaii. This was an ocean journey which took 3 weeks, and you were out in the great big blue with the squalls and the dolphins bow riding. So out of all of these experiences, I developed a great love of nature and creatures and the people. And I eventually moved to the US, where I became engaged in the environmental field and philanthropy, as you said. And after a few years, I realized that all the important decisions for the things that I cared about were happening at the policy and political level. So I went on to serve for 18 years on the board of the National League of Conservation Voters. This was at a time when, back then, not much of the resources that were going into the environmental field were going to politics. That is starting to change now, and helped to grow that organization and the political clout of the environmental movement. As we all know, it's hard to get anything done at the federal level right now. However, I would like to note that in the tax legislation that was passed in 2017, there was a bipartisan initiative to establish a tax incentive for something called opportunity zones. This effort is currently underway. These zones have been established in all the states, and funds are being set up as we speak. There is potentially billions or tens of billions of dollars which will go into low-income and disadvantaged communities. And I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to help promote green infrastructure and low-carbon development. And it's also one of the few areas where there is bipartisan work and agreement. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you, Maururu, which is what we say in Tahitian. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay, I'm Jim McDermott. As I listened to people talk today, I run a private equity fund called the U.S. Renewables Group that I've run for the last decade, actually 15 years. I was listening to you guys talk, and I realized that sometimes you have to go all the way around the world to run into people that you already know. And so Arnold, you may not know this, but I've been your neighbor for 14 years. I'm at the bottom of the hill there, so it's nice to meet you. And I wanted to say thanks for all the work that you've done. And Fran, the other thing that's actually quite interesting, the CEO of Altair is my college roommate, Tom Todaro. So I was thinking about sort of how small the world can be. I thought I'd share a little bit about my story and sort of how I got to what I'm doing. And it actually starts with, in 1991, I got recruited. If you have an undergraduate degree in philosophy and mathematics, you're not really qualified to do anything. So I got recruited into an investment bank. And I proceeded to fail the finance exam because I'd never taken accounting. But they had a bond math class, and I got 104. And the next thing I knew, I was a derivatives trader and a bond trader in the energy sector, which is a highly quantitative job. And so my experience of clean tech and the environment began with effectively a very wrong call. I thought that we would buy a $100 million bond of a municipal financed waste to garbage facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was trading for $50 million. And I told my boss, this is going to be a great buy. We're going to buy it. It's going to rebound to $100 million. And he said, great. So we bought it, and it went bankrupt. And I got sent to Tulsa, Oklahoma to turn around a half-built waste-to-energy facility with the promise of being fired if I didn't deliver. So off I went. And in the course of that, I was immediately immersed in power plants and the environmental issues surrounding them and what turbines are and all these things that I didn't know anything about. Anyway, long story short, I got the plant turned around. I negotiated with the air board, all these wonderful things, which was sort of a trial by fire. I got the bonds to rebound to par, and I sold the equity for a bunch of money, and I got a very small bonus, and I thought, that's like, finance is a great tool, but it seems like it could have a much broader impact rather than just sort of making money. So eventually, and this goes to the policy, I'd been watching very closely what was going on in the state of California and the promise of renewables and clean tech, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to leave New York City. I'm originally actually from Seattle and Los Angeles, and I thought I'll go back out to California. And I got here, and the policy had gone very, very wrong. It ended up in Enron and a number of other things. But I kept looking and kept reading, and it became apparent to me by about 2002 that really carbon in the atmosphere was going to be sort of the defining issue of our age, but no one cared. Going to exactly what you said, I would have go to these dinner parties, and I'd tell people, like, you guys should really care about this, and everybody'd say, whatever. And what became apparent to me at that point was that you had to think about it in different ways. And the concrete example I would give to you of this is that I started looking at oil and gas. Carbon monoxide and hydrogen are the two base inputs when you want to make a long chain hydrocarbon like diesel or otherwise. And I was doing a calculation in about 2003, and I figured out that the amount of material that was being landfilled into US landfills, if you did it on a carbon and hydrogen basis and then converted that back into diesel, represented about 30% of all US consumption. And I thought to myself, my God, we're the Saudi Arabia of garbage. And so I got on a plane and I flew down. This is by about 2007. I flew down and I just badgered the guy who was then the CEO of Waste Management. And I said, if you can reposition this company as an energy company and not as a waste hauler, I can show you how to turn a company that's got $15 billion of enterprise value into 60. You don't have to believe anything in climate change. But what I guess my thought around all of this is that one of the things that's great about these types of things is that trying to figure out in climate change from a financial perspective, how can I create benefit out of what other people view as a waste product or otherwise is an enormously powerful tool, because one man's garbage is another man's jet fuel. And I actually have a company that is actually, because of the policies that you guys have enacted in the state of California and all the rest, that actually qualifies under the low carbon fuel standard and makes jet fuel out of garbage. And it is being constructed with a municipal bond financing that we did that was insured with a group called New Energy Risk, which is basically a monoline insurer. And these are all financial tools that have been around forever. And I guess what I would say is that my story around this is that it really is possible if you can think about, sort of heretofore people have always thought of garbage as waste. It actually has value if you can repurpose it into higher value added products. But in doing that, you end up having to have the right policy, you have to have the right financial tools, and you have to have sort of an ecosystem and an environment in which that's possible. And what I would say is that, in conclusion, is that these types of sort of, the policy, the finance, and the technology have to be woven together into a single coherent strategy, or you'll never get there. And I hope that we, when we think about how to recycle and how to do these things, that you consider all of those pieces coming together, because ideas without finance are delusions. and policy without proper financing can't get it done. And so my thought is just that if we can consistently think about how can we take things that are thought of as waste or problems and reposition them and then share that financial risk around, we can be successful. So, thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Very inspiring. And I think in addition also, it is good to learn from the failure stories. I think it's not only success stories. I think, the 100 billion bond that you went on, I think that's really how you can learn also from what has not worked. But I'd love to come to Susan now. Again, we've heard from you already, but you have started a very exciting business, microcredit. Can you tell us a little bit more about your story?
Actually, my story was going to be about the low carbon fuel standard, and I thought it was the
Wonderful.
first time it was going to be mentioned, but now I have to tell this story. So how many people here are familiar with the low carbon fuel standard? That was born on a napkin in a bar in Buenos Aires. It was 2006, I think, or 2007, but we were, no, it was later than that, but we were with the head of the assembly, Fabian Nunez, the head of Chevron, General Motors, the head of the Energy Commission, Jackie Fannin Steele, and the head of the Natural Resources Defense Council on a what you would normally call a junket. We were studying the different fuel, the way Brazil and Argentina and Chile were diversifying their fuels away from gas and diesel into ethanol and other low carbon fuels. And we had to think, how can they do it here? We were in Brazil, and you had pulled up to any fuel station, and you could have 3 different choices of fuels. If they can do it here, why can't we do it in the United States? And we had so we were sitting down literally after dinner in a bar trying to map out how could you take this and do this in the United States. And we came up with the concept of the low carbon fuel standard, tapping into our political system, our system where the government doesn't necessarily own the fuel sources or the infrastructure, and we put in an incentive-based program based upon the low carbon fuel standard, and came back and pitched the idea to Governor Schwarzenegger, who said, "I love it, do it." And if you try to do something through normal government channels, it can take months, years, sometimes many years to put something in place. And this governor wanted things done yesterday. So we had to figure out how do we implement something like this that's controversial and put it in place that it could be implemented. And within 30 days that we came back, we had it written down on an executive order by the governor to the California Air Resources Board, which was the only body that had the ability to had the institutional authority to institute something like this. And we put in place the low carbon fuel standard. We held a big press conference, I think it was within 60 days of when we came back from that trip, that we had an order that the Air Board then took and turned into a regulation. It was attacked over years, but it was attacked by lawsuits, it was attacked on the regulatory process, but it survived all of those challenges and is still in place today because we had a governor who actually believed that anything is possible if you believe in it and you want to get it done. And that I was sort of ruined as a political person because I spent 40 years in politics and government. And once you work for Arnold Schwarzenegger, you can't work for another normal politician. This is a guy who actually believes that anything is possible if you want to do it badly enough. And when I've never seen anyone apply that principle to government before. And we were sitting, I think it was my first year in office with you. I was with him for 5 years, and we were sitting in we had these regular meetings with businesses around the state. And there were, we'd have these meetings with renewable developers, and they would come in, this is like our 4th or 5th meeting, they would come in and say, we're willing to build all of this renewable energy, but we can't get anything permitted. It takes years and years and years to get anything permitted in California. You can't build anything. And this was the 4th or 5th time that we had been in this meeting with this group. And if you ever get that Terminator stare, and he leaned over to me, and he's like, do something about this. So, and I tried this for a long time, and this is a really intractable problem. I pulled in a guy named Michael Picker, who was a labor organizer and an environmentalist, a real street cred in terms of being an environmentalist, somebody who had no nonsense, and he started ripping out some of the barriers to getting things permitted. And he got really creative, and he actually created a path to permit renewables. Then the financial crisis hits. And fast forward, the federal government puts billions and billions of dollars in play through the ARA funding and use it or lose it projects that if they were shovel-ready infrastructure projects, you could get money put in right away. Well, we had just ripped out all of the barriers to getting renewables permitted, and so now there are billions of dollars for shovel-ready projects, and we were shovel-ready because of that move we made with Michael Picker. And so in 2008, there were 500 megawatts of renewable projects permitted in the United States. 500 in the entire United States. In 2009, we permitted 5,000 megawatts of renewable projects in California alone. We did 16 gigawatts of renewable energy in the last 2 years of the Schwarzenegger administration. They were calling us the Saudi Arabia of solar. And we have so much renewables coming on the grid. We have so much renewables coming onto the grid today that it created what's called the California duck curve, which is so much renewables in the middle of the day that it forms the neck of a duck. At the end of the day, you have the demand shoots back to the grid and the sun sets. So we were the victim of our own success. We created this massive problem. And so and then when San Onofre nuclear facility came out of the portfolio unexpectedly in Southern California suddenly becomes ground zero for the changing grid around the world. We had a 44% reserve margin, and when San Onofre comes offline, we almost had brownouts in the southern part of the state because we couldn't get the power from where it was being generated to where it's being consumed. So we started the advanced microgrid, realizing that in a place like California, you had to have a different set of technologies in order to balance supply and demand and to do it cost effectively. And if we could do it, if the hybrid electric car industry can transform and create a revolution in the transportation fuel sector, we could do the same thing with hybrid electric buildings. So we took battery technology, harnessed very, very large buildings with battery technology, and created the same kind of hybrid electric fleet of buildings, and our first fleet is now operating in Orange County, down here. It's a 10 megawatt fleet of buildings that replaces a gas peaker plant entirely. It's being used nearly every single day to balance supply and demand without gas peaker plants. And Arnold Schwarzenegger was one of our very first investors, and the software now that is running that fleet of buildings, we're now in Australia, the UK, Brazil, we're going to Italy, we're going to so it's happening. It's a revolution that's around the world. My goal now is to make Arnold Schwarzenegger rich and famous.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Susan. Let me we're getting to the end. I would love to get to hear from Tara as well from the Rothschild Foundation, and then I'm going to pass the mic to Christoph just to share some of the insights basically from R20 on how to replicate.
Thank you so much. I'm Tara Roth with the Goldhurst Foundation. We have an initiative called LA 2050, which is how I'm going to orient my remarks. And a lot of a lot of the themes that people have talked about are elements of our story and my story about getting the message right, making sure that the messenger is correct, involving community, thinking about environmentalism as something that impacts human lives, humanizing, making people stewards and agents of their own future. Also using risk capital. So I represent philanthropy, and we like to think of our philanthropy as being risk capital, whether it's in the form of a grant or a loan or an investment from our endowment. I also think about cross-sector collaboration, which is also emergent as represented here. Government, public sector, nonprofit sector, and private sector. We're all invested in this work, and we all need each other. And another thing is that we use is technology for serving as an entry point for citizens to get involved, and also for amplifying and promoting messages and campaigns. So about 7 years ago, the Goldhurst Foundation, we realized we were making great investments and grants in specific discrete organizations, but we weren't sure how they were impacting the broader whole. So for instance, we were looking at solar energy storage research we were funding at Caltech, but how is that impacting communities right now on the street, people who are experiencing climate change, and how could we educate people about climate change mitigation mitigation. With our education reform efforts, we were thinking, this is great, even if we exceed our graduation rate goals and make people college and career ready, are there going to be jobs for people? Are there going to be viable, vibrant communities where people can afford housing, where people will have safety and health from environmental hazards and also from crime or whatnot? So we commissioned a research report called LA 2050, which is essentially a community-guided vision about creating a shared vision for the future of Los Angeles. We used a lot of academic advisors, but we also used what I now know to be our own Talanoa Dialogues. We used an initiative called LA 2050 Listens, in which we gave grants to 20 different community-based organizations where we would never have heard from the voices, and we let them message to their constituent base in the way that they best knew, in the way that their constituent base was comfortable to give us feedback. So for instance, we had a group of First Nation community members do a basket weaving conversation while telling us about the metrics that LA 2050 should be looking at in terms of making LA the best place to play, live, create, connect, and learn in 2050. We had a group of formerly incarcerated people at a town hall together talking about what was important to them. So what we were really looking at is people on the front lines of the problems helping to be part of the solution and validating solutions that we put forth with academic groups. So we really are about solutions that are for Angelenos by Angelenos. Then we put our money where our mouth was, and we set up the first online crowdsourced democratic grant-making initiative in Los Angeles that included private sector, public sector, and nonprofit. So we said, we don't care what your organizational structure is. If you have a solution for one of these goals and one of these metrics that's going to make LA the best place in 2050, please apply. So to invoke William Shakespeare, like Terry did, a rose by any other name would smell so sweet. I don't care if you're going to make a profit on this or if you're a 501c3. If you have a solution that's going to help Los Angeles with water, to reduce water importation or increase our tree canopy, we were there and ready for you. We've now done this for the past 5 years. We've had more than 500,000 people vote in the My LA 2050 Grants Challenge. And when you talk about public elections and margins of error, this is a large, powerful group of people, all community-based, all citizen activists. People equate voting in an online grants challenge to voting in a public election at the polls, which is a little bit scary, but it's also an opportunity. And people are really ready to take part in a broader solution. Another theme that came up was about repurposing, and I love that, reimagining, from the oil refinery to the biofuels, from Toyota to Tesla. And one of the organizations that won in the My LA 2050 Grants Challenge was Trust for Public Land, taking in what is one of the most part-poor cities in the United States, Los Angeles, taking the 900 linear miles, the 2,400 acres of alleys that are normally blighted, scenes of crime, not what you think of as being vibrant community spaces, and taking them and transforming them to put in semi-permeable and permeable surfaces, drought-tolerant plants, put in exercise facilities, fruit trees, and really transform these areas so that all citizens can have a place to walk and engage and do intergenerational play activities and learn about nature and connect. So we have a lot of work ahead of us as a world and as a city, and I'm really proud that LA can play a part in this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Dara. Christophe, over to you.
Thank you, Arnold, to inspire the world. What we have tried to do the last 5-6 years through our 20 is how can we export the spirit and the DNA of California outside in different subnational around the world. And what we have been doing is by connecting the dots between the best players. So you have heard here, connecting the dots between, I would say, policymakers at subnational level, who they want and they know what to do for their civil society, for their communities. Plus, we know we have good technologies. All about here is we know about the technology. We don't need new technologies. How can we make sure that they have access to the technologies? So our role has been to how can we connect both policymakers at local level with technology holders who can develop the right project. And you believe you have the solution, but you still don't have the solution because you need to access money. And the problem that we have found out that the UN system, the Bretton Woods system, so the development banks are not equipped to work with subnational authorities. And this is where the big market is for the communities to alleviate poverty alleviation, to have access to renewable energy, to have access to energy efficiency for waste management. So the whole idea was at the beginning how we could develop a proof of concept in only 3 or 4 projects. I mean, Terry mentioned about Brazil. We have worked also in Senegal in Algeria about waste management, and in Mali about access to renewable energy thanks to solar PV. And based on that, how can you go to the next step? And this is what Adam was saying. How can we go from 3 projects to 100 projects? So first of all, we need to have a portfolio of projects. So we did a portfolio of projects thanks to Leonardo DiCaprio support. And we were able to identify, 600 projects. So how you can help them to become bankable, how you can design, how you can develop, how you can make sure you have the right feasibility studies being done by the right people, by neutral parties, in order that we can convince a fund manager to have a look on it and start their work to get the funds done. So this is what Blue Orchard has been doing the last 2 years in order to have a fund being developed dedicated exclusively for subnational authorities and for developing countries on a market which is untapped. Above $5 million, it is too expensive for a foundation, for philanthropies, etc. Under 100 million, it is too small for the World Bank, for African Development Bank. And this is the market. So Blue Orchard told us, let's materialize those projects, and let's bet not only in 1, 2 projects, but let's bet on 50 projects. And then you got a mass which of interest for investors. So what Blue Orchard did is to have a first, what we call a first loss, which is equipped for development banks, for DFIs, in order that they take the higher risk with a lower return investment. And that is de-risking what we call the senior tranche for private investors coming. And this is where African Bank is coming, this is where philanthropies are coming, this is where national sovereign funds from Africa and private banking are coming. So we have been succeeding in doing that as a first one in Africa, which is certified as an SDG fund, and this is the first also that we are doing. And now we are starting to elaborate how can we develop this concept elsewhere in the island. This is how we came with the Fiji Prime Minister to have a dedicated fund for islands where you have mitigation and adaptation solution at islands level, which are above 5 million and below 75 million US dollars. We are doing the same thing with the Mediterranean islands or the Mediterranean coastal countries. We want to do the same thing on plastic issues. So we are working with Nestle, with Pepsi, with Coca, how we can develop a dedicated fund which is to collect plastic at community level through subnational, where you have a high return investment, but not on project of 200 million, but project on 10, 15, 20 million. So this is what we are doing, and this is what is our, I would say, our success story. So we made it something that looks like impossible from a small NGO perspective to something which is now possible. And we do hope that thanks to this new innovative approach, we will be able to convince the development banks to go through blended finance. And amazingly speaking, right now, the impact investing is only 0.3% of the total global investing in the world. And we need 2.5 trillion US dollars if we want to face climate change on a yearly basis starting in 2020. And the international community through the UN has committed to look for 100 billion US dollars. They cannot even do that. So this is why we do believe through fund managing, impact fund managing, working with local authorities, we can change the paradigm in order to make it happen. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Christophe. Okay, we are coming to a close, but I would love to hear from James Cummings a little bit, I think, on the social justice perspective.
So, thank you. Is this on? Yes, great. My name's James Cummings, and I'm a trustee of the Nathan Cummings Foundation. It was started by my late grandfather, who was an immigrant, had a lot of success in the food business, and left the bulk of his estate to his eponymous foundation. Traditionally within our family, his funding had been in arts, health, Jewish life and values. My generation, our generations saw the environment as something that was really important. So how could we do something about this, because it would make everything else moot if we don't take care of our planet? That got accepted. Moving to impact, I mean, it's a perfect transition. So our foundation has been doing active ownership of our stocks. We've been voting our proxies and trying to follow our mission, which is looking at climate change and inequality. Move ahead, foundations are required by the IRS to pay out 5% a year. What about the other 95%? What are we doing with our investments? Do we want to continue to invest in Exxon, who's very much in the news today? Or do we want to look at things that are more sustainable, that care more about the planet and people and what goes on? Needless to say, our investment committee is much more aligned, had been much more aligned with traditional investments. We went through a year-long process, bringing in outside experts, others who had already started down the road towards impact investing. And at the end of the time, I was a strong advocate over the years for this. In my dreams, we'd go maybe 10 to 20% in going into impact. But what I would talk secretly to my wife or to others, it's like, I would love to see us go 100%. Wouldn't that be great? But I want to stay at the table, because if I'm not at the table, my voice isn't going to be heard. We went through this process, and the head of the investment committee, who definitely comes from a traditional background, said, let's go 100%. The board last November decided to move our endowment, which is it's north of $400 million, towards 100% mission-aligned investing. Wow. What's interesting, thank you. What's interesting to me is that we have an OCIO, an outsourced chief investment office. So we are one of their clients. They have sovereign funds. They have in excess of $8 billion under management. And we are working with them as opposed to only going to people that are doing impact and saying, well, how can we leverage what we have, co-educate one another, and move this along? And that's what we're doing. And the billions to trillions is absolutely correct. There's billions in philanthropy, but we need to move it to trillions. Insurance is where the trillions are. So thank you for being here. And the final thing I'd like to share is my grandfather had a copper plaque on his desk. I have one on mine. And this is for all of us. Nothing will ever be attempted if all possible objections must be first overcome. Thank you for hosting this, Governor, Matt, Ambassador. I appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thanks so much. I think it comes back to Governor Schwarzenegger's motto, anything is possible. A very quick last word from Matt before we go into the closing.
So I grew up in a town called Modesto. Some of you are familiar with it. It's in Central Valley. And I remember just a quick story. My dad and I delivered a Thanksgiving turkey in a basket to a poor family outside of town. And I'll never forget, the family came out to meet us, and the dad and the family was standing there as we brought this basket. And clearly he had fallen on tough times and couldn't afford to feed his family at Thanksgiving, and we delivered this basket. And I remember the tear coming down his cheek, a very proud man. And of course, acts of kindness are critical, and we need to provide those acts of kindness to help people. But as I moved along into my career, the thing that I thought a lot about is, how do we not just give a hand out, how do we give a hand up? And so one of the moments in my path, my journey, and shared many great accomplishments. Many of the people around this table, this circle, have achieved many great things and have been blessed to work with with many of you. But Fran, I walked into her office and met with your staffer, Susan, one late Friday afternoon and said, hey, how do we help make sure AB 32 helps empower and benefit those low-income communities? And you, at the late hour, against some objections, took that amendment, we called it the Community Empowerment Amendment, and then later, of course, SB 535 got passed, and on and on. And so the reason I bring that story up is we need to find ways to help those most disadvantaged in our communities, not just to provide them a handout, but a hand up. So how do we put solar on affordable housing, which Terry and Fran and I worked on, and many others? How do we really prioritize those investments? And that's something we're doing here at Lacey. We're really trying to figure out how do we help those that have challenges in accessing capital, women and people of color, founding great startups. So that's why we're really excited to see how we can make sure we're driving impact, measure impact, and drive capital to those types of solutions. And we're in discussions with Emerson Collective and others about how we do that. And the partnership that we all represent here is really what's going to make that possible. So we've got to drive capital to the market, with policy market signals, but we need to make sure we're putting it where it is needed most, whether it's island nations or Watts or Pacoima. It's back to what Ken talked about too. And so thank you, Fran. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Akon. I've been blessed to deliver a solar system into Africa with Dennis Mukwege, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and know how hard it is to do what you're doing. So I just want to thank everybody.
Great. Thank you. Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone here. Let me just have a very few kind of high-level takeaways before I hand over to the Governor and to the Fiji Ambassador for the closing. I think what we've heard here is really to achieve ambition, we need to mainstream climate consideration across all industries, across all communities, get it really down to everyone, to all of us within everyday decisions that we're doing. How can we do that? I think I have 3 takeaways here. The first one for me is listen and learn from others. Once you get the Terminator stare, you will embrace the Talanoa spirit and get inspired from everyone and allow and embrace clapping. I think it is about changing everyone's daily thinking and really changing on how we think anything is possible, and I think that is very correct. The second, I think we do need to get the message right. We need to get the message across, and that requires that we change the narrative. I think we need to show that there's real opportunities. I think we've heard it here around the table. There's opportunities for investors, for the private sector, but there's also opportunities across the triangle between policy, finance, and technology, and I think we got to get better in delivering this message and getting it across to everyone. And the next and the final point I did want to make, I think all that requires real and new collaboration across all the different actors, across subnational, across policymakers, across investors, public and private, and to really make sure that we are able to share the learnings, that we are able to share the success stories and take them and replicate them. And through this new lessons and through these success stories really manage to get to scale and get to the ambition that we need to achieve in order to address the challenge we are facing. I think all that comes down to one thing. I think it takes leadership. We're all here today because we are convened by one of the leaders in this space, former Governor Schwarzenegger. It is, again, a true pleasure for all of us being here. I think we've all listening to an amazing story that you have actually started here for many of us. So I think we do want to thank you. And so before asking Ambassador Mara and thanking Fiji again for having us here, I'd love to hear any final reflections from you.
Well, first of all, I would just say that the Talanoa Dialogue that we had here today around this beautiful kind of artifacts, I think it's a brilliant idea. Because so many times when we go to those environmental events all over the world, we hear 5, 6 speakers. Then you hopefully have some breakout sessions where you get to know people and hear their stories. But it is never really a situation like this where you hear such inspiring and enlightening, educating, and motivating kind of stories. I mean, this was really unbelievable. Everyone, I mean, I learned again so much today here. And this is really how we create synergy. So I think this was really fantastic. So that's number one. And I want to say thank you to all of the people that sit here on this panel for sharing their great stories. It was really fantastic. Number two, I want to say that it is extremely important, and you just mentioned that about communicating. We can have the best ideas in the world about the renewable energy and about technology and about financing, but when the mayor of some little town doesn't know about it, that this technology exists and that there's actually financing for this technology and it could make money back and then later on be profitable and on and on and on, we don't have anything. And this is why it is so important for us to concentrate as much as possible on getting this information out there. I've just recently met with 3 prime ministers, not because of environmental issues, but one of them is because I'm filming in Hungary, so I met the Hungarian prime minister. And when I told him about our environmental work, he was fascinated and he did not know some of the stuff that was available and that was going on. And he was highly interested in the subject, wanting also to do something about green technology in his country. The same was also the case when I met with the Prime Minister of the Ukraine. I happened to go there from Budapest to do a speech there, a motivational speech, and met then with my friend Klitschko, who is the mayor of Kiev and world boxing champion, turned politician, interesting thing. And then the prime minister there, and we met, we had lunch, and they then started talking about the environmental issues and what we're doing. Invited them to our Vienna conference, environmental conference that we have every year there, together with the Austrian government. And he was kind of like, oh, I can't wait to come there. I'm interested to learn about it. And there were so many things that I shared with him that he didn't know. So I walked away from that. And I said to myself, meeting these leaders and meeting the mayors and all this, here's people that don't know. And these are smart people, and that are really interested in one thing, and this is to make their state or their country better. And they don't know. And so I think that's what we have to concentrate on, and this is why we started our digital legislative handbook, to share information with people. Because it's very important for them to know that, like in Algeria, when we went to Algeria with the R20, when the prime minister there said, what can we do with our garbage? And this goes back to what you said. I mean, he was like blown away when Terry said to him, he says, well, your garbage and your waste can become an asset. And he said, what? How do you do that? So he didn't know. So we then exposed that country to how to separate garbage and how to go and use garbage for energy. And so there's a really key, this is a key issue, is to get the information out there through technology. Now we have the technology, and to put that out there and really let everyone in the world know that it exists. It's like no different than selling a movie or selling the idea of fitness and bodybuilding or selling a political philosophy. No matter what you do in life, and no matter what profession you're in, you have to sell, and you have to communicate. Otherwise, the whole thing is you are spending a lot of time and wasting a lot of time. And so I think that's one thing we have to concentrate on. And the other point, the last point I want to make is, so many people always talk about that this is impossible. I have learned a long time ago that you never take no for an answer. I never listened to the naysayers, because they told me that you would never be a bodybuilding champion. They told me that I would never be a leading man in the movies. They told me that I would never become governor, and on and on and on. I heard the no's all the time, but I never paid any attention to that. And so I want to make sure that you understand that never, ever to accept this no or it can't be done as an answer. I believe what Mandela said, that everything is always impossible until someone does it. And I think that we have to show that it can be done. And it takes me just to a quick story with Fran. When we went back to Washington, we passed all these elaborate laws, environmental laws, and all of a sudden the federal government of the United States said, well, we're not going to give you a waiver, and you cannot regulate your own air. And they said, what do you mean, why wouldn't we be able to regulate our own air? I mean, we want to cut pollution, or we want to cut greenhouse gases. And they said, greenhouse gases is not a pollutant. and therefore we're not going to give you a waiver. So now we, of course, and this is now my own party, okay, on the federal level, arguing with us. And so, of course, Fran and I, we went back, and we met with the president, we met with Secretary Johnson from the EPA, and you really, I wanted to take Fran there just to show to her, you know, that I'm, even though this is a Republican administration, that I'm going to go all out and attack them, because, I mean, they were so, you know, ignorant about this subject. And so it was great to have a Democrat and a Republican there, and we tried to convince Secretary Johnson at the EPA that you got to change your mind. And he says, well, we're going to study this, what you're trying to do, and it's going to take 2 years. And I said, that's crap. I said, we're going to go back and we're going to sue you. And he said, yeah, well, you can't do that. I says, you know, I mean, we have all the resources and blah, 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 the usual stuff, right? So we went back and we sued them. And we went to the first court and we won. Then they you know, bumped it up to the next court and we won again. It went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. That was, you know, we have a conservative Supreme Court. So it had a really good chance of losing, but we won. And the Supreme Court of the United States said, yes, greenhouse gases and CO2 is a pollutant. Well, duh. I mean, so I mean, this is, but we went through that drama for a year, you know, suing and suing and suing, and then finally we got a waiver because they realized that they couldn't win. And so the point I'm making is that you have to go out and fight, not to take no for an answer. Fight, fight, and fight. If it's your own government, if it's the federal government or higher powers, whatever it is, you can go and fight for it. One person can make a difference. That is the bottom line. So let's do it all together, okay? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Governor, for your very inspiring story, and also for this opportunity to hear the many educational and thought-provoking and also inspiring stories from those that have joined you around the table. As I stressed at the beginning of this session, the role of the subnational actors can play a very critical role in this process. And it remains for the Fijian presidency now, and we will work together with the friends from the Schwarzenegger Institute to distill and collect all the conversations we've had this morning and put it together in an official submission for the Talanoa portal to ensure that the key messages we've heard today are considered at the political dialogue in Poland. I'm sure there are other stories that are yet to be heard, and we will collect all those and take it with us, because it is important that political leaders and government leaders hear the stories from the subnational level. And that is the assurance that the Fijian presidency can give you this morning. Thank you.
So I think with that, I'm just going to again thank everyone. I do want to thank very much our hosts here, the LA Clean Tech Incubator, and also want to mention that there will be tours available for everyone who is here of this amazing facility. We've had a chance to have a glimpse at it before, so I encourage you to use them. But I do want to thank everyone here again for having us. It's been a true pleasure being part of that, and I look forward to not taking no for an answer going forward. Thanks to everyone.